John was sitting by the window on his couch and suddenly saw a strange woman in the window opposite his house. She was twitching and looked very frightening. John couldn't take his eyes off her until she turned around and their gazes met. The woman became frightened and began to run panic-stricken toward John's house. Before he realized what was happening, the woman had already started breaking down the door of his house. John was in shock, not knowing what to do. He tried to call the police, but the woman was too close to him. Soon the door gave way, and the woman burst into the house. John recoiled, trying to get away from her, but her strength was incredible. She was like a mad woman, screaming and showing off the entire house. John closed his eyes, not wanting to see what was happening. He heard her running towards him, and the next moment he felt her breath against his face. His heart sank with terror. The woman began to whisper something in John's rogue ear. His hair began to stand up. He realized that she wasn't just scary, but something much worse. Fear took over John. He couldn't move. He couldn't move. He couldn't utter a word. The woman laughed at his fear. She knew he had fallen into her trap. The next moment she took him by the arm and dragged him into the dark basement room. John was exhausted. He could offer no resistance. There were several other people in the basement, all in frozen poses and emitting inhuman sounds. John realized that he was the victim of some strange cult and his end was very near. The woman smiled sinisterly and approached John with the knife in her hand. He closed his eyes, preparing for the last moment of his life. The next moment he felt the knife stab into his chest, and soon everything around him went black. The woman started whispering something in John's rogue ear. His hair started to stand up. He realized that she wasn't just scary, but something much worse. Fear took over John. He couldn't move. He couldn't get a word out. She laughed at his fear. She knew he had fallen into her trap. The next moment she took him by the arm and dragged him into the dark basement room. John was exhausted. He could offer no resistance. There were several other people in the basement, all in frozen poses and emitting inhuman sounds. John realized that he was the victim of some strange cult and his end was very near. She smiled sinisterly and approached John with a knife in her hand. He closed his eyes, preparing for the last moment of his life. The next moment he felt the stab of the knife in his chest, and soon everything around him went black. When John opened his eyes, he found that he was on a stone altar in the center of the room. All around him stood people in strange robes who had distorted faces and empty, lifeless eyes. The woman who had brought him here stood over him with a smile on her face. She began to preach something in an unknown language, and then picked up a knife and began to recite ritual words. John realized that he was a victim of this strange cult and that his life was in danger. He tried to free himself and run away, but his limbs were immobile, as if he were shackled. But suddenly a strange light filled the room and all the people around him started screaming hysterically. The woman holding the knife stopped in utter amazement. At that moment, John felt his body fill with energy and he was able to get up from the altar. With this new power, he was able to free himself and grab the knife from the woman. He quickly looked around and found his way out of the basement. The fear had not left him yet, but now he had hope for salvation. John ran out of the room and ran through the woods until he reached the road. He stopped his car, asked for help, and managed to get to the nearest town where he recounted his horrible adventure. The woman and her cult were found and arrested, and John was able to return to his normal life, though he will never forget the terrifying experience.